Joining us now is Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz. Congressman, first, want to thank you for the time. You've repeatedly come back on the show here, so we certainly do appreciate your time and insights. I want to know where you stand on this, and should the Senate put a new justice in place, even though we're less than 50 days away from the election, actually within 45 days now?
I would first say I went to law school in a time period when a majority of law classes went from being men to being women, and many of my contemporaries looked to Justice Ginsburg as an icon and an inspiration. And so certainly we acknowledge the impact she's had on our country and the legal community, and particularly aspirational women in the legal community. I think that President Trump ought to do what President Obama did and nominate a replacement. I think President Trump has a constitutional obligation to do that. The Senate has a constitutional obligation to advise and consent. I disagree with the Republican senators who've said, well, no matter who the nominee is, we don't believe in a vote before the election. I think that is a dereliction of their duty to engage in the process. Now, just like you wouldn't set an artificial limit on a surgery, you likely wouldn't set an artificial limit on this confirmation process, but I think the nomination should begin, and I think the hearings should begin immediately.
We do know that in March of 2016, Trump told CNN, quotes, the next president should make the pick. Senator Lindsey Graham also weighed in. We do have a clip. Let's just take a quick listen there.
I want you to use my words against me. If there's a Republican president in 2016 and a vacancy occurs in the last year of the first term, you can say, Lindsey Graham said, let's let the next president, whoever it might be, make that nomination. And you could use my words against me, and you'd be absolutely right.
Congressman Gaetz, would you regard any politician reversing their opinion on nominations during an election year as hypocritical?
It is a reminder that our words ought to be sweet because one day they might be fed back to us. Frankly, I think that the Senate should have taken a vote on Merrick Garland. And if Mitch McConnell and the Republicans had reason to vote against him, and I thought there were plenty, they should have just voted no. I think it did set a bad precedent, what Republicans did in that circumstance. And I don't think two wrongs make a right. I think that the standard ought to be doing your job for the term in which you were elected. And I hope that that is what happens with this vacancy that has been made now.
We've already heard some Republican senators say that they're not in favor of installing a new justice right now. If you were a senator instead of congressman, what would you do?
I would fulfill my constitutional obligation. They need to be holding hearings. They need to engage in this confirmation process. I believe that that could be concluded before the election, and I think it is very irresponsible for Senator Collins and Senator Murkowski to say already, in the absence of even a name, that they don't believe that the vote should occur. I think that we shouldn't use elections as a way to parse out when we're going to really do our jobs and when we're not going to do our jobs. We should do them for the full term in which we are elected.
A name that's emerging recently, Judge Barbara Lagoa as Ginsburg's successor. You are backing her. Why is that?
Well, I know Barbara Lagoa. I think she would make a fantastic pick. There are other women the president is considering who would also do a phenomenal job on the court. Barbara Lagoa is someone who grew up in the blue-collar community of Hialeah, Florida as a first-generation American. I know it would be very exciting to have a woman of color on the court nominated by the president, but I think that in my conversations with the president as recently as yesterday, he is focused on a bold and exciting pick in true Trump fashion. He wants this to be something that really energizes people and that will be of good service to the court and to the country.
Switching gears here while we have you, Congressman, President Trump has seemingly gone back and forth on a possible TikTok deal here in the U.S. Want to get your perspective here, as certainly the conversation was initiated around a national security threat. It seems that we've deviated a great distance from that, from what we've been tracking. Perhaps you can give us some perspective as to how you are seeing the deal play out right now.
TikTok is a national security threat. It is dual-use technology used by the Chinese Communist Party. And by the way, it's not just TikTok, it's DJI drones and a number of other entities that China uses to gain a surveillance hold for strategic advantage. I am grateful that the move to Oracle seems to be a better national security fit than Microsoft. A lot of Microsoft's artificial intelligence work and research and development is actually going on in China. So I worry about their close relationship with our enemies. I think with Oracle, we'll have a better partner, and I'm hopeful that we get that transaction done just for the safety and security of the country.
We do know that it's going to undergo a national security review as part of the terms and before the entire stake closes, because it's not an acquisition. It's just taking on an equity stake, it seems, with a trusted technology provider label and a move over from Google Cloud Services, so already in the U.S. or using a U.S. entity, over to Oracle's cloud. But then additionally here, if we're looking at some of how Oracle has really tried to move into this position, it doesn't seem like there's an actual changing of hands for the U.S. entities, as was originally the outset push from the administration.
Well, anything we can do to divorce the Chinese Communist Party from this widely utilized technology in the country, the better. I think in this particular case, moving that cloud computing, domesticating it, getting it out of the opportunity for China to use it for nefarious purposes is the principal objective, and those dynamics you described are precisely what will be reviewed during this national security analysis of the deal.
Okay, and then just lastly as well, while we have you, the House recently postponed a vote on a bill to federally legalize marijuana until after the election. We know that this is something that you were very much a part of and involved within. You're the only GOP co-sponsor on that bill. Will you be voting, and why will you be voting yes on the MORE Act, and what do you want your Republican colleagues to know about this?
Well, I think the federal government has lied to the people of this country about marijuana for a generation, but we're just getting breaking news that the vote that we thought we were going to have on the MORE Act to decriminalize marijuana federally is in fact not going to happen. Democrats are pulling that from consideration. We're hearing that's because Joe Biden does not have a view on cannabis reform that is sufficiently progressive, and it might put his campaign in a difficult position if Joe Biden himself was not supporting the work that Democrats were working with me on in the Congress to ensure that we didn't incarcerate another generation of Americans over marijuana offenses, and that we allow research so that marijuana can be used as a tool to potentially unlock cures for people who are suffering. But, you know, it's just really disappointing to me as someone who's worked across the aisle on cannabis reform to see Democrats abandon the effort to walk off the field and say, this is just something we'll deal with after the election. Whether it's the Supreme Court or whether it's marijuana reform, what's so hard about just doing our job? You know, showing up to work, doing our job, and then letting the voters judge us in the election. When we step away from these tough choices, I think that we do more to undermine the credibility of this place than the Democrats even ever accused President Trump of doing.
Trump has also voiced concern, though, over marijuana being on the ballot. What is your reaction to the administration's stance going into this election year?
Well, there are circumstances where marijuana is put on the ballot in a state not to generally advance the cause of reform, but to alter the turnout model. There is a political science theory that if you put out marijuana issues on the ballot, you may turn out more young voters, more urban voters in support of those initiatives. Frankly, I'm less concerned about the politics and more concerned about the policies that a majority of Americans want to see implemented. Marijuana reform enjoys the support of 80% of the country, and yet we've been paralyzed in the Congress because Democrats don't want to put Joe Biden in a tough spot, and Republicans are worried that talking about marijuana might energize young people. If we just did the right thing, we could energize the entire country around that which would be beneficial to our fellow Americans.
All right, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, we appreciate the time here on the day on a range of topics. Thanks so much.